And I'm from the National Education Association. And we're a proud supporter here of the Netroots. And as you know, No Child Left Behind is a top priority for our organization. And we wanted to know what specifically will you do about the growing public backlash around No Child Left Behind?
You know, I really appreciate your asking that, because education is such an important issue, but if you have followed the debates that we've had up until now, it rarely gets a question. It got one question in the YouTube CNN debate, but it doesn't get the emphasis that it deserves because of the role that it plays in all of our lives and the future of our country. Specifically with respect to No Child Left Behind, here is what I have said and what I hope to do in the upcoming hearings and work about reauthorizing No Child Left Behind. First of all, I think we've got to admit that No Child Left Behind became an unfunded mandate. It was unfair because new expectations, standards, and rules were imposed upon our schools without the resources that the Bush administration had promised. So that was a real breach of the bargain that many of us thought we were entering into. Secondly, the Department of Education in the Bush administration has been less than understanding or even competent in enforcing No Child Left Behind, which has meant that even if there were parts of the law that you could argue make sense, they have been rendered irrational by the way that the federal government has tried to bring a heavy hand to implementing them. And thirdly, I don't think anybody disagrees with the principle of accountability. I have been working on education reform since 1983, when I led an effort in Arkansas to raise the standards for Arkansas schools. So I am very much and passionately so in favor of accountability. I mean, I don't know if any of you saw, this is a little bit of an aside, but it was such a shocker. The new school superintendent in Washington, this extraordinary young woman that the mayor has appointed, she discovered a block-long warehouse with textbooks still in the wrappings that had never been handed out in the Washington, D.C. schools. So accountability for the system, some measure of accountability for the students so we don't lose kids. So here's what I think we need to do. Number one, we need a different approach to accountability. We need a growth model. Now what I mean by a growth model, and the educators in the audience understand this, we need to track the progress and performance of individual students, because that's what our goal should be. How well is Mary or Johnny doing? Not in the aggregate, how well is the system doing? Yeah, the system, that's important, but I want to know what each individual child is doing, and I'm trying to work on an idea that is sort of like what I'm doing in healthcare, where I'm promoting electronic medical records, because I think you should own your medical records. They should be your property. And if we had an electronic medical record system, the RAND Corporation says we'd save about $80 billion a year, which we could then plow back into healthcare. Well, I think we should have an electronic education record for each child, because what happens now is, especially kids who are low income, or poor, or homeless, or migrants, who move a lot, you lose them completely. And by the time a child is in the 3rd grade, if they're behind, they're on the path to dropping out, and a child drops out every 29 seconds. So let's try to figure out how we can marry technology, and any of you who know a lot about technology, which many of you do, think about this for me. Think of the pluses and the minuses. I'm trying to think of a way where we focus on the individual child. So a growth model, not the testing every year that is in the aggregate, and then people draw conclusions from it. However, there is one aspect of the testing that's currently going on, which I don't want to lose, and that is, up until No Child Left Behind, which is one of the attributes of it, if you were a minority kid in a district where it was mostly, affluent or white, you were lost. You were a special education kid if you were a non-English speaker. So we've got to keep track of groups of kids, but I'd like the emphasis to be on individual accountability. Secondly, we have got to move toward national standards for testing, because the other thing that the Bush administration did is, after imposing all these tests, as states began to say, well, our kids aren't doing very well, the Bush administration basically winked and said, well, just lower the standards. Well, that's really helpful. We we are in a global competition, and we've got to try to bring out the potential of every child. It doesn't help if we turn around and wink, wink and say, you know what, your kids aren't doing very well, drop the standards, make the tests easier. So I would like to see us move toward something like NAEP, which is the National, what is it? The National Accountability for Educational Progress Testing. Thirdly, if you're going to impose these burdens on local school districts, the federal government has to step up to the plate with the resources. You cannot impose an unfunded mandate. Fourthly, look, reading and math are important, but so is history, so is science, so are the arts, and what has happened in too many schools and school districts is that kids have basically been deprived of a broad curriculum. You know, certain subjects get cut out. First, physical education and recess goes, and now we're seeing an epidemic of obesity among young children, leading to 13, 14, 15-year-olds being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I mean, that is a ticking time bomb. And you've got kids who learn differently. Not everybody sits in a classroom, takes notes, and learns when the teacher is talking to the child. You know, sometimes kids will get inspired because they do have an art class. You know, sometimes the discipline in a physical education class turns a child around. By depriving kids of a broad curriculum, we are depriving them of the opportunity to have their imagination and their intelligence ignited. And we are eliminating so many of the so-called extras that made a difference. You know, I was born in Chicago, I was raised in Park Ridge. I mean, I remember my field trips a whole lot more than I remember a lot of the other things that I did. I had a great public school education, but going to the Field Museum made a lasting impression on me. So we've got to get back to a diverse, broad curriculum. And finally, there are two things that are not in No Child Left Behind that we've got to pay attention to. The best thing we can do to close the achievement gap between African American and white kids is pre-kindergarten. Quality 4-year-old kindergarten programs, especially focused on kids from disadvantaged backgrounds where English is not the first language in the life. That would be my highest priority, and I'm going to try to see whether we can get some of that money out of No Child Left Behind to start doing demonstration projects on that. Then, as we go through the school experience, we pay very little attention to high school. You know, the dropout starts as a child who enters school behind in kindergarten, begins to feel a sense of failure in 3rd grade, bides his or her time, and is gone by, you know, junior high or high school. We've got to do more to intervene. We need more mentoring programs. We need more connections for these kids to be feeling like they can succeed. We've got to do more to get back to providing real skills training for kids who aren't going to college, because the fact is that we've got, thank you, you know, if everybody you know that you hang around with or you blog with went to college, well, you're in a minority. Because even today, an age cohort, about 60% plus will not graduate from college. So what are we doing with all these other kids, these great kids who are contributing to our country? Well, we're ignoring them. And I think that is at a great detriment, and it's a real, you know, insult to them as our fellow citizens. So we've got to do more, not just to make college affordable and get kids prepared for college, but let's make sure we also have programs that support kids who aren't going to college. So I can talk about this all day. I'll stop here, but thank you very much for your question.